So now we looked at profit maximization in the short run. Now let's jump to the long run. And so with economics, the difference between the short run and the long run is the ability to change capital. It doesn't have to do with time. It's all about capital. With economics, it's assumed that in the short run, capital is fixed. But in the long run, the firm is able to increase or decrease their capital stock however they see fit. So when we've been talking about determining how much labor to have, we were looking at it from assuming just the marginal product labor. So we were just choosing labor. All right, we were assuming that capital is fixed, which you can do in the short run. In the long run, however, you can't do that. All right. So in the short run, we had the marginal revenue product labor equal the wage. All right, that's where you maximize your profits. Marginal product labor times the marginal revenue, that's your marginal revenue product, equals the wage. If we assume the competitive labor market, the price equals the wage. And so the marginal product labor equals the real wage for profit maximization. In the long run, however, both labor and capital can vary. Okay, you can adjust both the labor amount and the capital amount. So if we go back here, we still have the marginal product labor times the price equals the wage. Okay, and let's do this one here. All right, and so we still have this here. Oops, how do I get back out here? All right, let's cancel that for a second. Let's try it again. So we have those two linked. All right, so the marginal product labor times the price equals the wage. The same concept as that can be said to the marginal product capital times the price equals the cost, or C, which is the cost of capital, which is same idea here. So the marginal revenue product to capital equals the cost of capital, and so you have the marginal product to capital times the price equals C. So the same thing just gets applied between these two. So if you take this then and you divide, or you solve both these for P, so divide both sides by the marginal product labor here, and so you have the price equals the wage divided by the marginal product labor. And then if you take this equation, you have the price equals the cost times the marginal product of labor. And if you take this one step forward, if you set the price of both of these equal to each other, and you get the price equals the wage divided by the marginal product of labor. And so if you take the price here equal to the price here, you get the wage divided by the marginal product of labor equals the cost capital times the marginal product. It should be marginal product capital. Marginal product of capital. Okay. And so this here is the profit maximizing condition in the long run. And so in the long run, right, we have the wage divided by the marginal product labor equal to the capital divided by the marginal product of capital. Now the numerator in both of these is the cost of the input, and the denominator is the extra output, or sorry, yeah, it's the extra output from employing an additional unit of that input. Okay. So the wage divided by the marginal product labor, it's the added cost of the wage divided by the marginal product labor. It's the added cost of producing an added unit of that output when using labor to generate it, that increase. And the cost capital divided by the marginal product, it's the added cost of producing an additional unit of output when using capital to generate it. So this equation says that to max profit, the firm needs to adjust their labor and capital so that the marginal cost of producing an added unit of or an additional unit of output using both labor and capital is equal to each other. So it's saying those two price ratios are going to be equal to each other. So let's take this a step further then. So let's say the wages increases. Okay. So if the wage increases, and we have, so what we have is we have our wage divided by the margin of product of labor equals the cost of capital divided by the marginal product of capital. Okay. So what happens is that if the wage increases, okay, so the wage increases. Now we have two different effects happening here. So first, if the wage goes up, we talked about that scale effect. All right. And so with the scale effect, if the wage goes up, the cost of capital, the cost of producing the good goes up, and so you're going to produce less of it. And so when that wage goes up, the demand for both labor and capital is going to go down, all right, which is the scale effect. The other thing that's going to happen, though, and this goes back to what we talked about, the substitution effect, all right, this explains why it is. And so what happens is you have the wage over the marginal product of labor is now going to be greater than the cost of capital divided by the marginal product of capital. So let's just say, for example, this was 3 divided by 10, I don't know. So the wage is 3, the marginal product of labor is 10 for that unit amount of labor. And so if this goes up to 4, 4 over 10 is greater than 3 over 10. And so what that means that you're going to lower capital and increase lower labor and increase capital. And this is because of the declining marginal product labor. So remember we showed that the marginal product labor is decreasing as you increase your labor. So here we have, if the wage over the marginal product labor is greater, you need to make this side smaller and or this side bigger. All right. So, well, how do you do that? Well, if the wage is set by the market, you have to adjust the marginal product of labor. So if you want to bring this side down, okay, well, how do you do that? Well, you want to, so if you can't affect the numerator here, all right, you have to affect this. And so if you want to make a number smaller, the marginal product of labor, has to go up. Okay. Well, because of that downward sloping one, then you have to decrease your labor. And if you decrease your labor, your marginal product is going to go up. And then you can also then, if you want to increase, the cost of capital divided by the marginal product, it's the same thing. You can't affect the cost, so you want to increase this. So if you decrease the marginal product, this entire number is going to increase, and so you do that by increasing your amount of capital. So I know that's a lot, but that's just kind of runs you through that. Now, the two could be gross substitutes or gross complements, and what that means is that when this happens, it all depends on the scale effect, which one's bigger. And so substitutes in production means that you produce more of one, you produce less of the other, and vice versa. If, however, and we talked about this a little bit prior, if the wage goes up and if the wage goes down and you end up producing more capital, then they're going to be gross complements. If it goes down, they're going to be gross substitutes. And so the other topic to talk about here is if it's a non-competitive product market. Oops. If it's a non-competitive product market, then it's the case where, let me take this off here again. Oops. And so you remember when we talked about the, let's just look at the short run for a second. So in the short run, we said the margin of revenue product of labor equals the wage. Okay, and so that's the marginal revenue times the marginal product of labor equals the wage. And if you remember when you're looking at you have your demand curve, this is product. And so if you have your product demand, your marginal revenue ends up being less than the demand. Okay, and the way that it works was you would have your supply or your marginal costs where they equal each other. That's you're going to get your profit maximizing quantity, and when you go up at the demand, that's where you get your profit maximizing price. So that means that for any given level of output, your marginal revenue is going to be less than the price. Okay? And so what that means is that the marginal revenue is less than the price, then the marginal revenue divided by the price is going to be less than 1. So let me erase this off for a second and then bring it back. And so when we go back here, we said that you have the marginal product of labor times the marginal revenue equals the wage. Okay. And if you divide both sides by P and you have the marginal revenue divided by the price times the marginal product of labor, right, equals the real wage. Okay. So this is if you're all I did was divide both sides here by price. You remember when we look back to the profit maximization in the short run in the competitive market, this marginal revenue equaled the price, and so this was just 1, and so you had the marginal product of labor equals the real wage. Okay. However, because in the non-competitive market this is going to be less than 1, it's going to be the case so that the demand for labor for a firm in a non-competitive market is going to be below that of a competitive market. And really that just means that, which is a little bit self-explanatory because there's less units that are sold in that market, but this just kind of shows you in equation form why that is.